Hello, everyone, and welcome to another Webinar Wednesday. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Stephen Phelps, and I am the Marketing Manager here at Acumen. And today's topic will be covering how to automate your AP payments from within Sage. For this webinar, we brought in Jason from Abillipay, and he'll be showing you how simple it can be to bridge the last mile of your AP. But before we begin, please note that this webinar is in listen-only mode. And if you have any questions, then please use the chat option and we'll answer them near the end of the presentation. We have a lot to cover within 1 hour, so I'll now hand it over to Jason.
Thank you, Stephen. Stephen, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Yeah, thank you for the great introduction. This is Jason Strunka with Abillipay. It's a pleasure to be speaking with all of you today. I think we'll really make good use of your time here. I'm hoping everyone will find this insightful. Obviously, I believe most or all of you are Sage users of a couple different flavors, so I think this will be highly appropriate. I've known the folks here at Acumen for quite a few years here as well, Paul and the team. So just have a lot of we're thankful to be able to speak to all of you today. I'll just kind of a couple minutes on myself here, or maybe 30 seconds actually. I just want to mention that kind of how our company came to be. I personally have worked in the AP procurement software kind of vertical for over 10 years and really have kind of done everything from enterprise software sales into large companies to helping smaller operators find ways to streamline their processes. So I've worn a lot of hats. I've been in hospitality, I've been in gaming on the ops side. I've moved into procurement, accounting, a lot of different areas. Over the years, I think what makes this relevant to everyone here is that we've seen such a shift in the last year or two with everything happening that the need for automation has grown. But at the same time, we've seen that, a lot of companies don't have bandwidth for big projects, and maybe there's still a lot of churn in your businesses. And so you want to improve oftentimes, but you don't always have the resources or the team members or the time to make those improvements. So we feel like this is really an easy lift. So we're happy to really bring this to everyone today, so you can get a feel for how this works in relation to Sage. So that's kind of high level what our company was founded to do, was to help companies simultaneously address labor issues, address issues with things like bank fraud, and address what might be losses of revenue, or maybe everybody would like to improve their revenue. So we'll talk about the revenue aspect of what we offer as well. We leverage essentially a payment processing network of over $4 billion annually to really help companies using Sage bridge that last mile where they're typically handling paper checks today, or maybe even made some of the switch to ACH. We'll talk a little bit more about that dynamic and how that applies. We service a number of different verticals. There's really almost everyone can benefit from efficiencies in AP, regardless of what vertical you're in. But as we look at the gap, essentially everyone on this call has invested probably heavily into making Sage work really well for you and kind of living up to its potential. And what we often find, though, is that businesses we go into, they've got more robust reporting tools. They've got, Sage doing all these great things for them. And when they get to the last kind of mile of AP, it always ends with mailing paper checks and, difficult bank rec on paper checks and, reissuing payments and all the kind of things that, manual check signings, all those things that come along with that. So what we do is we help address these challenges that their current solution isn't handling, just because it's not set up to do that. And so one of the things we focus on is helping CFOs to do more with less. And so, everyone understands, finance is always looking for ways to improve the P&L. And so obviously one of the ways to do that is automation. There's also the creation of revenue. There's also, helping you more easily control cash flow and maximizing yield on payments. And, for all of you, if anyone's still using paper checks, I imagine most of you still are in some capacity. That's probably why you're here. I think everybody probably instinctively knows, if you've been in the grocery store line or doing, anywhere close to AP, I think everybody probably knows checks are kind of bad. So I won't really drive that point home, but just some stats around it. They are responsible for 10 times more bank fraud than electronic payments, which is a pretty stunning stat. What's really interesting about fraud is that it seems very regionalized. In our conversations, we have companies that have been repeatedly having issues with bank fraud, and everything that happens downstream from that with changing accounts, having to go through control measures, they keep seeming to get attacked. And then we'll have other accounts where they want to automate, but they haven't ever had check fraud. They've been really lucky. There's stats on this, and a lot of them come from places like PwC, and that's that the average transaction cost for paper checks is $6 to $8. And as you can guess, a good amount of that is labor. Quite a bit of it is actually follow-up and handling payment issues. It's not even always the issuance of the payment itself, but a lot of the sort of back and forth that happens when there's an issue, handling vendor questions. We find that AP spends about 84% of their time just actually dealing with AP related issues. We also find though too on that cost per check that increasingly the cost of the materials continues to go up. And so just things like maybe fees for positive pay, fees for high security paper checks that can't be as easily washed, those materials end up being, in the range of a couple bucks per payment as well. And so, just kind of a stat on businesses doing about 500 checks a month, we find that, at least according to PwC, they're spending about $2,000 a month just processing those 500 checks all in. That obviously doesn't take into account larger scale businesses. It doesn't take into account fraud or things like that happen. But, and then of course, there's also the opportunity for revenue generation, but at least it's kind of a baseline. When we look at the typical AP process, I don't think probably anyone on this call needs to be walked through it. Everybody knows this fluently, but, the AP process, this is actually supposed to look kind of messy, but it actually is cleaner than what it really is. You've got a work stream for processing paper checks. You may have a separate work stream for processing ACH, wires, if you're doing any sort of manual card payments where maybe you're logging into websites to put in a card number. These are all things that take time. Of course, this doesn't take into account things like ordering supplies, making sure you have enough check stock, talking to Pitney Bowes, whatever those things are, buying envelopes from Office Depot. And this kind of manual reconciliation process, I don't think this probably does it justice either. So suffice it to say that, this process can be lengthy, and we like to call it bifurcation, where we see companies that have tried to migrate to ACH from checks, and ACH was going to be this sort of panacea that sort of fixed all the issues where, if they could just get to ACH, they wouldn't have to do these paper checks anymore. And I'll talk a little bit more about, where that kind of has run into issues, but suffice it to say, it's created this kind of bifurcated split process for a lot of companies where now they're trying to do payments a few different ways. Some of it's driven by their vendors, and it's kind of put them in a bad spot where they almost are worse off than if they were just processing pure paper checks, because at least then it was a consistent process. So, is ACH the answer? I'll kind of dive a little deeper on this. We've seen a lot of companies spend, 6 months plus on big projects trying to convert vendors to ACH, and they end up converting, 20, 30, 40, sometimes more than 50% to ACH manually. And what they still end up with is they're still having to manage the data. There's still risk of fraud in those cases. ACH fraud's on the rise, just like check fraud was. As ACH has become more of a replacement for checks, you could expect the fraud has gone up as well. But what it also doesn't address is the fact that those payments still have to have a lot of manual process around them. If the data isn't correct, the payment fails. There's still, in many cases, you have to do reconciliation on individual payments. There's no revenue opportunity. Once you shift the vendor to ACH, you can never move them to something like card. So it actually kind of hurts the opportunity to grow revenue in the future. So we would say that ACH is not the answer. It's a little bit better than paper check, but it's not really the end goal. It's not the future of payments. The way we see the future of payments is automating this entire last mile of the process. What that means is actually putting a solution in place that handles everything downstream from approval. So not only not having to issue checks initially, but also not having to deal with follow-up, not having to deal with vendor questions. If payments fail, being able to actually have those payments reissued in a way that's automated for your company. So it's not just about providing tools for your company to do better, but actually to sort of relieve you from those last mile processes where frankly, you'd rather be spending that time on other things. So that kind of gets us a little bit into what Abillipay does for clients. So, as we talk about your use of Sage and how Abillipay ties into this, what we essentially do is we provide a service for you where all vendor payments for you are handled regardless of payment type. If you need to send checks to vendors, if you want to send ACH payments, if you have a wire you need to send, maybe you have a few international payments or a lot of international payments, not having to break those into different work streams, not having to worry about settlement, not having to worry about bank rec on those payments. That's really where we come in. Our company works with Sage, and so essentially we can get your payment requests fulfilled and guarantee settlement to all of your vendors for your payment runs each week. What we do is we provide concierge level care, as we like to call it, to not only you, but also to your vendors. So imagine that each week when you have payment run, instead of clicking print checks and then firing off your ACHs and so forth and setting up some wires, imagine sending everything to us in a clean batch file once you've approved payment. And we get that batch file and we guarantee settlement to all of your vendors in that batch file, and that we do that securely. So that's really what we offer. And it's not only important to provide you with a high level of service, but we also have to provide that level of service to your vendors. One of the things we like to do is we like to insulate your company from having to deal with vendor issues, return payments, questions about payments, where's my money, those kinds of things that are sort of the bane of everyone in AP or controller's existence. And so we do that expertly. But besides just getting payments to your vendors, we also can shift vendors and help monetize your payments. So we get a question a lot, what is monetizing payments? How do you do that? Well, what we're able to do is, instead of just taking your payment file and paying all your vendors with paper checks that cost you more money and cost you in postage, we can actually shift those vendors to things like ACH, to things like virtual card, to lower cost payment methods. So not only are you saving money by, not incurring postage and other related costs, but you can also generate revenue. We'll talk a little bit more about card revenue and what that actually looks like in just another moment or two. But the last thing I want to mention on this is that there's a security element to this as well. Obviously, as a company processing payments to vendors, there's things like PCI compliance that we have. There's things like positive pay. But beyond that, we also process all of the payments to your vendors from our clearing account. And so instead of having thousands of bank transactions against your account for your vendor payments, you fund one transaction. That batch file you send to us each week, it's one transaction where you fund the total batch, and then we process payments to the individual vendors from our clearing account. And so in that way, your company is insulated from having your bank information, going through the mail stream with your routing information and your bank account and everything else on it. Those ACHs are also coming from our accounts. Everything's coming from our clearing account, so it's more secure in and of itself. The end goal really is to help boost efficiency, to get all of these pieces of work off your plate, the management of your vendor data. When a vendor changes an address, when a vendor changes an account number, making sure those changes are secure, doing rec on individual payments. Those are all of the things that we can help you move off of your plate. The end goal of that is not only reducing hard costs on things like postage and supplies and so forth, but also driving down what might be labor costs. And we recognize that a lot of companies right now, you don't maybe you don't want to drive down your labor costs. Maybe you barely have enough staff as it is to make it through the day. So what we like to do is help put more time back in your staff's day so you can focus on more mission critical items. And then of course, security is a big part of anything, but insulating your company from what's becoming rampant bank fraud in 3 out of 4 businesses is definitely something that is going to continue to be helpful going forward. So let's talk just a second about revenue. How do you actually generate revenue? When we shift payments to virtual card method, that's essentially how you generate revenue. Just to talk about it in layman's terms, our company has a virtual card payment method that can be used instead of check or instead of ACH. And so the vendor can actually say, hey, you know what, I'd rather take a card payment than a check. Those are conversations that our company is, that's our core competency, is talking to your vendors and saying, hey, you know what, would you rather have a payment method that's more efficient? Oh, okay, you would. We can start paying that vendor with card. And so our virtual card method, what it does is we can generate a one-time use card number for that vendor to run for that specific dollar amount to that specific vendor. And so they can process that card payment just like anything else. For you, it's a little bit like, I'll use the grocery store again. You take your Capital One card to the grocery store and you paid for $100 worth of groceries and you got 1% back. You're going to be the beneficiary of that revenue. So when we pay your vendor with a card, you're actually going to get cash back. Now, people often ask, well, do I get hit with higher rates from the vendors or things like that? The answer is not really, because the vendors can elect to take this method of payment. If they'd rather have ACH, if they'd rather have check, they can be paid in those ways. Natively, the way most vendors are paid is check. So we can convert them, if not to card, to ACH. We find in our business, I'd say roughly, close to 20%, sometimes more, percentage of vendors will take our virtual card method of payment, which means maybe around approximately 20% of your transactions, you could be using a card method and earning significant cash back. And so these, you're essentially the beneficiary of that revenue we generate. What clients of Abillipay really appreciate is that, we won't get too much into, how, fees and things like that on this call. But suffice it to say that most of where we make revenue as a company is through virtual card revenue. So we really don't try to make money on payments or subscription fees or other things. What we really offer is we say, hey, you know what, Mr. Customer, we'll help you generate revenue through your vendor payments. And, the way you pay us is you share that revenue with us. And so we're mutually incented to grow that pool of money for your company. And it sort of keeps us all honest, where we're all swimming in the same direction. And so if we don't make revenue for you, we don't make revenue for ourselves. And that's really kind of our value prop, and clients really appreciate that. And so what we're able to do essentially is to move companies from, what's essentially overhead in AP to actually turning AP into somewhat of a revenue center. Generally, we we provide statements to clients quarterly, and those statements are usually cash flow positive because the nominal, fees that we charge for other services for things like check and things like ACH, those actually are generally far outweighed by the cash back that they're earning through our program. So you really can take, what's a pretty cost-heavy AP department and turn it into a revenue generator. And that's exactly what we see, where we drive down costs and add revenue back for companies. This is kind of just a snapshot. I don't know the size of everyone's company on the call today. You could be very large or very small. I really have no idea. But what I can tell you is this is kind of just a sample of how a typical company might be, 95 +% check, maybe a small amount ACH, and then, little or virtually no card spend. And so we can actually shift cost out of AP by driving payments away from these methods, taking it off of your plate, and then adding revenue back in through things like virtual card. And so you take cost away, you add revenue back in, real hard cost, real revenue straight to P&L. You have a pretty nice shift in your outcome. What we'd like to offer everyone, and it's kind of our standard approach, is for each of your companies, we'd be happy to provide an AP analysis. Essentially, what we would do is we would look at the number of payments your company is processing annually. We'd look at the amount you're spending with your vendors, and then we could actually show you how much you'd save on a per payment basis. Maybe you're spending several dollars per payment today all in. Maybe we could shift you down to 10% of what you're spending today on payments. There's also the revenue aspect of that. So, based on what you're spending, we could analyze how much we think is card eligible and how much revenue you could generate each year. And then of course the net results. So, net of any of our services, and how that all rolls up for your company. I'll take you into a little bit of an overview of what the portal actually looks like. Essentially, what we like to talk about is one-click processing. For everyone using Sage, I'll show you a little bit about kind of the file and how we grab that out of your accounting system. But we have two ways to interface with Sage. We have a kind of a no IT approach, and then we have more of a true integration format, just depending on kind of what your company is looking for. And once we get a batch from you, it's really one click to process payments. And it's not even a one click to replace a weekly check run, but it's really one click to replace the processing of the payment, the answering vendor questions, the dealing with data, the dealing with reissue of payments. So it's really a huge paradigm shift. And what we like to do is provide you really solid reporting and analytics out of our platform. So if you have any questions whatsoever about payments, did it get there, those kinds of things, you have full visibility into that. The reality is, though, when payments come over to our system from Sage, the clients generally will have them marked as paid in Sage, because we guarantee settlement on our side. It's marked as paid in Sage. You fund a batch to us, and we handle it from there. And kind of within that, most companies will just rec to the batch total that they send us, so they're not having to do bank rec on individual payments anymore. And that process just really makes it simple, because you approve your invoices, you approve your batch to go out of Sage, and then we grab that file at the last step and we handle everything downstream from that. So we grab the file, we process the payments, and within processing those payments, we optimize each transaction to make sure you're getting the lowest payment cost and the highest revenue on each transaction. I'll just kind of show everyone what this looks like, kind of do a virtual login here so you can see. We have both we call it the client side and the supplier side view. So not only do we have a portal for you, but we also have a portal for your vendors, so your vendors can actually see what's going on as well. When you log into the portal, you'll see the dashboard here, and I'll kind of get into more of this in just a second. But really the beauty of what Abillipay brings is, you want to automate, but maybe you don't have a lot of time to do it. You don't want to have to train. You don't want to have to spend a lot of time on change management. We feel like this addresses that, because we take the burden off your plate, and then we give you just a really clean dashboard so you can just track what's going on. There's not really much to have to train on here, besides what you're seeing. It's kind of what you see is what you get. If you want to process a batch, you can simply come in here to files. This is where all of the previous batches you may have processed are living. To process a new batch, you just hit the plus sign here and pick a file. So you just grab your export right out of Sage, you upload it, it's in. I'm going to hit the little upload button right here, and my file is being processed. So when you have a new file come into our system, the system will scrub it. It'll do a verification on that. It'll make sure there aren't, duplicate entries in there. It'll make sure there's nothing kind of hinky going on. So it'll run a security check on it. Once that's happened, the file will be accepted. So it was just accepted. And then after it's accepted, the system will draw the batch fund total. So let's say, you put in a file for, $78,000. Once it verifies the file's okay, it'll draw that batch total from your account. We can grab that a couple different ways. Traditionally, we would grab it through ACH. Some companies are always a little leery about, people grabbing money out of their account. So I kind of like to think of it as maybe training wheels. You could send us a paper check, you could send us a wire, you could do different things. We have a lot of different ways to fund that batch, but ACH is kind of the most common. So you've just basically done your weekly payments. You sent in the batch, we approved it, the funds are drawn. Now it's our responsibility to get payments to your vendors. Generally speaking, if it's a card or ACH payee, we'll process those payments, same day or next day. If it's a paper check that we're sending out, that paper check usually goes out in 1 or potentially 2 business days, just kind of depending on the time we get it. Now, I showed you the process here on how to import a file. Generally, you could just schedule an export or export, whenever you have that batch ready to go each week, whether it's Wednesday or Thursday. Some companies like to feed that over electronically. So we also have an integration option where, instead of kind of doing the drag and drop like I just showed you, you can have the file scheduled to go to us through an integration. So that's all possibility as well. For everyone, this is kind of our standard file format. So sometimes we get questions about, well, what's in that file? What does it look like? So generally you'll have, kind of these fields in here, buyer ID, buyer name, supplier name. You might have different business entities. That's a question we get a lot. We do a lot with multi-unit companies, maybe a company that has 20 senior living facilities or 20 hotels, or You might just have different divisions, different sub companies. So we can have, different company names. We can have, different accounts, obviously different vendors, invoice numbers. It's not shown here because it's cut off, but you can have things like vendor notes and all of that as well. We also get questions too about, what does the vendor get? So we send a remittance page with checks. So, vendors will know what payments are for. When we send electronic payments, we also send remittance data with that as well. So like, let's say we pay a vendor with a card, that card might be for $7,500, and we can send a remittance to the vendor saying, hey, this is a $7,500 payment, here's the 10 invoices that it pays. Jumping back to the dashboard just a little bit, we have some nice tools in here. We've got your kind of where you are month to date, year to date. We have different analytics down at the bottom. I don't think it's shown here, but one of the ones I really like is you can actually see your payment breakdown by modality. So you can have, percentage of checks, percentage of ACH, percentage of card. So you can kind of track how we're doing in terms of migrating vendors away from check towards things like ACH and card. There's a lot of different tools to kind of slice and dice in here as well. You can look at different details. I can do a zoom view here. So there's all sorts of different criteria where you can track payments. We also have the ability to show you payment or check images as well. So if you want to see like a picture of a check, you have access to that. There's a lot of ways to slice and dice, but you can also do exports as well. So if you wanted to export, all your payment data for the year, maybe you've got an audit, you need to pull data, you need to look at images, you have access to all of that in our dashboard here. One thing before I move on, normally too, this is a demo environment, but in the lower right-hand corner, you have a chat tool. So not only can you look up payments, but you also can, talk to somebody without having to pick up the phone. I'm a huge believer in chat. I don't like calling 800 numbers. So if you want to, just ask a quick question, you can type it into the chat and get an answer without having to pick up the phone. We make the same level of visibility available to your vendors. Again, we want to insulate you from getting, calls and questions from your vendors. And so we provide your vendors with a portal as well. So your vendors can actually come in, they can see, all the payments that are coming from your company, if they're pending, if they're settled, what's going on. So that's kind of one layer to try to sort of get them off your back, if you will. They also have access to talk to us through things like chat as well. So it really helps us to sort of give them better intel and help you out. And then they also can see things like graphical information, just like you have access to. The next thing I'll talk about briefly is how to get started, right? So Abillipay sounds easy. What does it actually take in terms of a lift or change management? We like to try to get clients rolled out in about 2 to 3 weeks. It's kind of one of those things we can move as fast as you can. We've distilled this down before for clients, and really, I think we found it takes about 8 hours worth of work to get this automated. And there's a few basic steps that kind of go into that. Number one is we like to look at a 12-month history of your payments. What that does for us is we're able to look at your vendors and sort of parse out who's gonna be likely to take card, who will probably take ACH. We can get all those vendors established in our system. So when we get payments from them, we'll have information on that. We also can do an analysis for you with some basic payment details. So there's kind of just getting a handle on where you're at as a company with AP. And then we help set up that batch file export. Obviously, Acumen is the best out there really at working with Sage. So, whether it's our company or yours or someone from Acumen, there's different ways to help, whether it's just setting up a simple file export or whether it's, creating an integration. We have, we have different options to make it as easy as you want. From there, we just have you approve our communications. So we send communication out to your vendors. The communication essentially is us letting your vendors know that we'll be processing payments on your behalf. And, if they have questions about payments or settlement or anything like that, just to contact us and we'll help take care of it. And then there's account authorization. So, we have to pull the batch funds from your account. So there's, basically just, simple authorization that we have to get for that for security purposes. So that's kind of the gist of it is getting the batch file set up, working with you to approve our communications, the account authorization, and then you're ready to go. You can start sending us batches, and the first batch you send us will be the last time you have to do check payments, and then we'll also be handling work with your vendors and make sure that those payments are getting made, and you can stop having to do bank rec on all those individual payments and everything else that comes along with that. I think what we'll do next is, we have a little bit of time left on this hour, so we can take some questions. If we don't use all the time, that's totally fine, but we're happy to answer some questions right now, and then we definitely can schedule time with each of you, one-on-one to help put together an analysis for you and talk about this a little bit more as it relates to your company and your specific process.
Thanks, Jason. So yeah, at this time, we'll open up the chat options. If you guys do have any questions, we'll read them out loud. There was a few that came in during the presentation, so we can go ahead and get started. It said one was, how is your solution different from what our bank can offer?
Yeah, that's a great question. We actually get that one a lot. So I'll give you an example and then I'll go into kind of detail, but the way we would compare this to a bank is that it's kind of like taking your car for an oil change. Taking your, the bank is essentially you buy the oil, you buy the, the funnel, you crawl under your car. They're essentially providing you the tools to make a payment, but they're not providing you a comprehensive service. And we've seen a lot of companies initially, kind of bill pay has been around a long time where you log in your account, you kind of click here, click there, pay some bills. And it hasn't worked for a lot of companies. It hasn't worked well with their approval workflow. It hasn't worked from a service standpoint. So some good examples are vendor adoption is probably one of the biggest. They have, they'll come out sometimes with like teaser rates on, hey, we'll give you this great percentage cash back on your vendors. And what they do is they set minimums on the amount you have to spend with a vendor in order for them to contact that vendor to ask them if they'll take card. And so it's kind of a question of, they never asked. And so a lot of the big banks will say, if you're not spending 20K or more with that vendor, we're not going to call them to ask them to take card. And so what happens is they call the top 10% of your vendors and, they get a few of them on card and, that you really just don't get any sort of meaningful revenue back from that. It's a good teaser rate, but they end up, not really giving card to anyone. And we really find that it's the long tail of smaller vendors is where we see the highest level of card acceptance. So it's really kind of grinding it out, working all the way down your vendor list to make sure that, we're actually offering these lower cost payment methods to all of your vendors. I know that's kind of long-winded and that's just kind of the revenue side of it. From the service side, I've never seen a bank that's reissued payment when a payment has failed. So if that card payment fails, if an ACH fails, if a check fails, that's going back to you to investigate. It's going back to you to get into your next week's check run. And that's kind of where, we'd provide a service, we'd answer the questions, we would make sure that payment gets there. So it really is kind of the difference between, pulling into the shop and they change your oil while you sit in your car and have a cup of coffee versus, kind of buying the tools to do a job that you still have to carry out.
Perfect. The other question that came in said, If we need a paper trail or have strict approval process, can you accommodate us?
Yeah, I appreciate that question too. So we have, the answer is yes. We've had clients, there's a number of different industries we serve. Tribal gaming is a good example. There are tribal bylaws where there's some pretty complex processes. Sometimes we run into processes in industries where, there's two-party payments, construction, you've got waivers that have to be sent out, subcontractors paying out suppliers. I think we've seen it all. And so we've, been pretty creative in working around these processes to make sure that, everybody involved, it meets their standards. Obviously, there's access and visibility into the data in our system. So that's huge. But we also, I think Sage as well does a good job in, being able to have an approval process that works. And then we can capture that file when it's really, time to make those payments. One thing we don't like to do is we don't like to try to we don't like to duplicate a process that you already have. If you're approving invoices in Sage and you're getting payment batches ready in Sage, we don't want to, come in and try to say, hey, you got to log into our system to do X, Y, Z to have additional approval layers or whatever it is. We like to try to have you, keep everything in your accounting system a record. And then, when it's appropriate, you send us the file and you're done.
Thanks, Jason. It looks like those were the only 2 questions that came in, so we can go ahead and wrap up early. So thank you all for joining us today. If you have any additional questions, please reach out to your assigned account manager by emailing us at am@acumenfl.com or give us a call at 407-965-2411. If you like more information on Abillipay, and you can also schedule a quick discovery call to go over your AP process. We'll work on getting this webinar posted on our YouTube channel, so make sure you subscribe to that as well. Our next webinar will be on November 3rd, and we'll go over tips for year end and what you should be doing to start the new year. So please be on the lookout for invitations. And I believe that's all we have. So thank you all again for joining. Thank you, Jason, for the great presentation. And we look forward to seeing you on our next webinar Wednesday.
Thank you all so much. Really appreciate everyone's time. Have a great rest of your day, and thank you again.